Hey, welcome to our Q&A Tuesday. I'm Brandon James. I serve as the family pastor at First Baptist Hendersonville, and I'm excited to answer some questions we've all been wrestling with over the last few weeks. I've got Jason Gibson with us. Jason, introduce yourself, share a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Hey guys, I'm Jason Gibson. I'm the director of the BabbCenter for Counseling, and I am right in the middle of all of this, just like everyone else, with my 4 children at home, and just trying to figure out how can we survive and thrive in the midst of something we've never experienced before.
So I'm hanging out in my daughter's bedroom. I've turned her room into my office. What kind of office are you in? It looks like you've got a paddle and a coat hanging up back there and some other pretty awesome things. What do you got?
Yeah, so I have what's called a Zoom virtual background. I have actually been working in my closet during this time because I've found that the number of doors that you can place between you and your children really helps calls like this go a lot smoother. So I have to walk in my room, walk into the bathroom door, and then get through the closet door so I can hear them coming.
That's impressive. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's amazing what a virtual background will do to your closet. That's probably the fanciest closet I've ever seen.
Yep.
Well,
Sure.
we want to jump right into this. First question off the bat, though, we all need a little humor in our lives. I've seen some different memes on the internet. What's probably the funniest one that you've seen that's kind of given you a laugh?
So the one that has actually cracked me up is so there's this little video in which it's a video of a guy, and it says, hey, you've got the coronavirus and you need to be quarantined with your family. Or you've got the coronavirus and would you A, want to be quarantined with your family, or B, and he immediately says B. It doesn't even allow the guy to get out what option B is. It's just this guy is going to choose B over A no matter what. So it's hilarious because there are times we probably all have thought or felt that really it doesn't matter what we would be doing instead. We just don't want to be here in the middle of the chaos. So it's pretty funny.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, this happened at the very beginning of this. We were all having the allergies and the itchy throat, and there was a picture of a dog that it was like that itchy throat. What is that, Rona? And I thought it was pretty funny because I think we were all feeling that. Oh, I got the Rona. But the reality is this is a serious thing, and I remember the first time someone that I knew really well, loved one, a family member of them, came down with the virus, and it hits home, right? And the other aspect is we're all cooped up in our houses, and there's a sense in which even if we're not affected physically by the virus, there's a lot of questions that just stir in our mind that I think it's important for us to wrestle with. So I want to just get into some of these questions. We've had different people submit some questions over the internet, via email, different things like that. The first one is just this sense of feeling overwhelmed. We're in this together. Someone put just a general feeling of feeling overwhelmed, underprepared, and ill-equipped. And I think we would all say we're all feeling that way because this is the first time we've ever had to deal with something like this. So what would you say to somebody that's just feeling this sense of overwhelmed emotion? I don't feel equipped. I don't feel prepared. What encouragement would you offer to them?
Yeah. Listen, when I read that question, like it just showed me how insightful that question is because we are all the same. And you said it really well. Like we're all in that boat together. And really what happened before all of this kicked in is we had what I'll call social media envy, that we would look at other people's social media feeds and think, oh my goodness, how can they have it all together? I don't. So then that gap, that distance between how they appeared and how I see my reality is so great. I feel bad in the middle because of the distance between the two. So now what we have is we have more time to engage on social. So we have more time to see how everyone else has it so much more together than we do. So that gap increases and it just gives us more despair. So you're not alone. And honestly, just social is just a great, perfectly manicured outside when we get disheartened because we know what we feel on the inside. So, and it's funny because people are really good at social. Like they actually will put vulnerability posts that still at the same time make them look super awesome. So then we get even more disheartened because it's like, oh my gosh, even in their vulnerability, they do vulnerability better than I do. So it's so tough. But the way that God created our minds, the way that we're created is that when events happen and they go into our minds and our hearts, He created our minds and our hearts to attach meaning to it.
Mm.
And what we do is, as we understand things that happen, we can very quickly take it and just put it in the box where it's supposed to go in our minds and our hearts. And we have a context for that. You know, like if you go through a drive-through and you get bad food service, you're like, well, it's a drive-through and I literally paid $2 for that. So I got $2 worth of service. That makes sense. But when there's a global pandemic and you don't know if your kids are going to go back to school, there's no place to put that. So
Mm.
what happens is that instability, that lack of understanding just swirls around over and over and over. Then you become mentally and emotionally exhausted because we don't know where to put this. So that's just another piece. So when you put the pain of comparison and you combine it with the reality of the uncertainty, it just makes you really exhausted.
Mm.
So you're not alone. We're all in that.
Yeah, I think there's a sense that exhaustion that plays into just our mind, and it wears us down, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. Especially a lot of these parents are having to homeschool, right? We're like all now homeschool parents, and so there's a sense in which you get online, like you were talking about, and see, and these parents are doing this or that, and you're like, man, how do I keep up? Because a lot of this is a fear of my kid getting behind and some different things like that. So there's just a sense in which we're not prepared for this and we're not equipped.
Yeah. Hey, and you really brought up a great point because a lot of times the feeling is not really the feeling. And I know that's kind of counselor jarble, but really think about it this, like I'm feeling worried and concerned because my kid is going to get behind, but
Mm.
that's not really where the feeling stops. Like let's take that a little bit further because really it's not just I'm upset or sad or worried that my kid's going to get behind. Let's take it a little deeper because the next feeling behind that is then that means I'm not a good mom, or
Mm.
that means I'm not a good dad. So, a lot of times when we look at an issue that bothers us, it's really important to take that next step and say, okay, what's behind that? Because when we can look at what's behind it, then we can address the root. And in addressing that, then it trickles back up and helps take care of some of those pieces.
Yeah, that's great. That's great stuff. There's a sense in which we're living in this. Let's just wait and see what happens next. And we're, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, however many weeks into this, and it just continues. At church, we've been talking a lot about, man, we've been looking to Easter and we had Easter and it's exciting. And then now we're coming off of Easter and it's like, oh, what's next? So we're typically really excited about into school things and looking
Mm,
towards the summer. But there's just a sense in, I think a lot of people are just feeling just kind of there's just a mourning, if you will, a sadness. And somebody put this in their question. When we're all in a wait and see what happens next world right now, I pray, I do my devotion, I do the things I know I'm supposed to do, but I'm just starting to feel that stay at home blues, as they called it. What do we do when we just start to experience that? We've been cooped up. We don't really have something to look forward to right now. How do we handle that um, as a
yeah,
parent, as a family?
yeah, that's a great question. And there's a lot of pieces to it. Um, that if you look at it like legs on a table, it's not like there's just one leg. There's multiple legs, and for all of us, there could be little differences in that. But it's important to just think through, what are the places where they're sagging. Um, for some of us, it's loss. Like feeling those blues are just the reality of loss after loss after loss happening. I have a beautiful senior in high school, and what's happening is that starting from the days when she was Young, she watched High School Musical, and she saw all the cool traditions that happen in high school. Not that actually kids sing and dance in the middle of the hallways at her school, but culturally, when we look at media and movies and stories and things that we even talk about at church, like there's lots of rites of passage and traditions that happen. Like her senior prom and senior awards days and senior graduation. That not that they're not going to do a graduation. I know that they're committed to that, but there's a lot of things that have been lost. And at times, like, you can articulate what you're missing out on, because let's do it on the parent flip side. Like, this is my first child that's going to graduate from high school.
Yeah.
So I have dreams and hopes and aspirations of what that experience would be like. Because as a parent, it's like, first, can I get them to sleep through the night? Then can I get them to use the bathroom on their own? And then can I get them to go into their kindergarten classroom without clutching on me? Like, there's all these milestones as a parent, and getting a child from birth to graduation is a huge marker.
Yeah.
So I'm experiencing some of those feelings of loss too, of moments to celebrate her. So what we find is that there's things that come and go, and we don't actively think about what we're losing. We just feel this overwhelming feeling of blah. So what I do, but I encourage all of us to do, is to name it so you can tame it. Now, forgive me for that crazy rhyme, but what we have to do is, instead of just getting through the day, we have feelings and emotions, and we've got to stop and say, okay, I'm feeling this way. What's going on around me that could contribute to that? And for me, it could be a school reminder text message that comes through that says, hey, school actually is not going to come back until May 4th. And all that it is information. And the sender of the information is trying to help me. But I didn't actually think that, well, May 4th means they're going past certain dates. And in those dates means now they're not going to do these certain things. And that means there's going to be a loss. So all it was a simple text message. But in my heart, it just triggered all of these other things that I feel. So that's why it's important to, like, take a moment and just be like, okay, what does this mean to me?
Yeah.
And then, like, if you could do this, people won't, but if you could do it, actually kind of write some of those things down. Because what happens is, as you get them out and you put them somewhere, that helps you at least make it visible. And when you make it visible, you can help begin the process of making it manageable. So you're going to feel, so part of it is loss, that you're just naturally feeling the blues and all that because of loss. Now, another part of that is because all the predictability of your schedule is gone. It's shot, right? Because you had natural rhythms that your family would go through. Like, a natural rhythm for us as a family is we'd go out to eat on Friday night.
Yeah.
And for us, that was like a marker of the weekend starting, because nobody had to cook supper. The kids were super excited to get out of the house. And then a lot of times that was actually attached to some sporting or school event that we were all a part of. And just like you said, so now we don't have anything to look forward to other than maybe the kids running and watching the cars drive down the road, wondering if maybe it's a magical person that's going to show up and sing a song in our driveway or something.
Yeah,
So,
it was funny the other day. The ice cream truck drove by, and it was like a sense of normalcy a little bit. It was something to look forward to.
Yeah. So there's actually a lot of legs, and I know we got a lot of questions to get through. But if you look at, like, loss, if you look at the predictability of your schedule, but then the other part is, like, we have natural rhythms in our life that work best for us. Yeah. Like, I am my best when I get to bed at a good time and I get up early. Because when I get up early and I have a couple of hours of quiet time, then that allows me to be ready for my day. But if I stay up late and then I'm tired and then I get up a little later at the same time that my kid gets up and I haven't had my 2 hours of, like, quiet time, then, like, I'm not the best, because we start straight with chaos. And I can't start straight with chaos. I've got to start straight with some time that allows me to look inward and look upward. So that would be another one of the legs for me personally, but maybe for others, is look at your schedule. How different is it from what worked for you before? And then try to adjust your patterns to get back to things that you operate best with. So, you ask about a funny meme. This is probably one of a really hilarious one. It said something like, you know, self isolation, introverts have been preparing for this moment their entire life. So, you may be like, if you're an introvert and like this isn't bothering you so much, like, don't feel bad about that. Like,
Yeah.
hey, that's great. And just recognize that the extroverts in your life are over there dying. So maybe you can throw them a bone and give them a call because they're just waiting to talk to somebody.
I think that's great. There's a sense in which you talked about understanding when you're at your best, and what are the things that kind of lead to that and fuel that, and what are the things that don't. And sometimes we don't know what those are until we go through them. And so this is probably a little bit of an exercise to help you self-evaluate a little bit of saying, okay, like there's some things I can't control right now, right? But once, hopefully, when we get back to normal, you'll have a better understanding of, man, I need to guard against these things, I guess,
Mm.
because I know I'm not at my best when I'm in this kind of environment, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and let's not publicize this, but sometimes when we don't have some space away from our kids, we're not necessarily at our best, right? And
Yeah.
I think that teaches us a little bit about our world can't revolve around our children. There's a sense in
Absolutely.
which it does, and we have to make sure they're alive and breathing and are fed and those kind of things. But there's a sense in which self-care is really important as a parent, because the better we care for ourselves, the better we can parent and love our kids well. And so I think we're learning some things through this.
Hey, you've nailed it. And that's where, like, from a parenting perspective, I like to follow the steps of I do, we do, you do, right? And you just nailed it with self care. That we want our children and our teenagers to be equipped to care for themselves too, because ultimately they're going to be outside of our homes. And what a better way to teach them how to do that than in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah.
I mean, my parents didn't have the opportunity to show how to keep from melting down in the middle of a global crisis, but we do. We get that chance.
It's a
So
privilege.
it's a privilege, right? So looking at that, like, showing our children, teaching our children and teenagers how to self-care starts with I do it. Like, I've got to show them how to have safe space and to pull back when I need to recharge so that I'm not present in the worst me. So then we can do it together. I can show them how to do it and guide them in the process. So ultimately they will do it when I'm not around. And absolutely.
That's great. Just a couple questions in relationship to that. One person submitted this: I'm enjoying having my kids at home until I'm not. What can I do, or what can we do to keep from driving each other crazy during this time? What are some things? And there's another question on the teenager side. So let's focus more on the younger children, preschool, elementary kind of age group. We love our kids, right? We've got a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old at home, and man, they're just full of life and energy, and it's incredible memories that we're able to make right now. But at the same time, it's like I need some space. How do we handle that? What are some practical ways that we can deal with that?
Yeah, great question. And you know what I find is not actually in the doing that's most exhausting with our children. It's actually in the coming up with what we're going to
Yeah,
do that
yeah,
is absolutely exhausted. Because you sit there and it's almost like you're a car salesman. Like, okay, kids, what we're going to do right now is we're going to go outside. We're going to go outside. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? How about this activity? What if I modify it this way? Would that be enjoyable for you? Will you be engaged with this for longer than 5 minutes? What? No, wait, what? You're fighting? Oh my gosh! Now what are we gonna do? And
yeah,
it's the coming up with it that's super exhausting.
yeah.
So my encouragement. Well, let me tackle a couple of practical things and then come up with an overall idea. So one of the things that's exhausting in our home is snacks, right?
Mm,
Food. Like, kids are always hungry and they're always wanting snacks, and they happen to always not want the snacks that you have for them. And that's completely good for them either at that moment. Like, you probably don't want to hype your kids up on Mountain Dew and Snickers bars. So, trying to figure out a way to do that. So, one of the ways that I encourage is in your pantry and in your refrigerator, have an anytime snack shelf. And what I mean by that is get something that your children can reach if they're young, on both of those, in the pantry and in the snack shelf. And in the refrigerator, and just say, look, when you're hungry, you don't even have to ask. You
Hmm.
can go right there and you can get this and you can have as much as you want. I don't care if it's right before supper time or right after supper time. It is for you. And what that does as a parent is you spend the time to create that shelf, and then you don't have to engage. So when your kids come to you and say, hey, what can I have for a snack? And then you're like, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And they're like, no, 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 no. They say, can I have a snack? You say, sure, take anything you want from the anytime snack shelf. And then you just allow that to be it. So then that takes one argument away from your day. And that is just a proactive way to conserve some energy instead
Yeah.
of those moments of arguing about food. So come up with something. I'm sure you can Google great snacks to have, but just take the time to create those, and that'll give you a little bit of brain and heart space through the day. Another thing that you can do is you can create, and I actually encourage you to sit down with your kids to create these things. Like ask them what would be some snacks you would like, and just get all their suggestions and do that. But you can also do that with activities. That you could take like a sheet of paper, and on that sheet of paper, you could draw some squares. And
Yeah.
in the squares, you can ask your kids, what are some things that you really enjoy doing? So for younger children, maybe it's coloring, and you can have a picture of a crayon. And then maybe it's building blocks, and you have blocks. And for your young elementary kids or other age kids, you just make it age appropriate. So if you've got 3 kids, then have 3 of these things. But you come up with 12 activities of things that they can do. So that when your children come to you and say, I'm bored, I don't know what to do, say, well, go to the I don't know what to do chart, and it's on the fridge, and then you already have it there. And the thing that makes it work is if it's crayons and Play-Doh and blocks, well, you go ahead and make sure that you actually have crayons, Play-Doh, and blocks.
Yeah.
Because as a parent, what makes it difficult is coming up with what to do. And invariably, they select the item that we actually don't have in the home or we cannot find. So it just creates conflict, right?
Right.
Because your 2-year-old is like, well, I selected the activity, Father, and
Yeah.
you don't have the supplies. Would you please get organized?
And they said it just
No.
like that too.
Yeah, just like that. But what it does is having a chart then gives you things that they can go and do, and it takes you out of the negotiation process. And just say to the kids, if they come up with other ideas, be like, oh, that's a great idea. Maybe we can change it out next week. So from snacks to activities, it gives you just some things that you don't have to spend all of your energy coming up with ideas. You've already done the work. And if you can ask them to help you come up with it, then you can flip and say, will you help me come up with the ideas? And then that gives them a way that they can have something to do. But I do like the idea of coming up with a schedule.
Yeah.
Because if you can come up with a schedule, it is a little bothersome on the front end, but it makes things better. Because in that schedule, you can have things like room time. Like as a parent, it's good for you to have a little bit of distance at times so you can gather yourself and you can actually do some of the things that you need to do. Well, part of the day needs to be play in your room. So then that gives them the chance to have a break from their siblings, and you don't have to then disentangle kids from when they're arguing. You don't have to continue to entertain them. They just know that for these 30 minutes, it's room time. And then maybe there's some TV time. And then maybe there's some outside time or garage time or whatever.
Yeah.
For wherever you are, however you live, and whatever you do, just come up with blocks of time and then put that schedule out there so that kids can have an idea of what they're supposed to do. I really like the idea. You can do it on a dry erase board, or you could actually cut out little boxes that say chart time, which means they pick from the chart, and then snack time. And you can put Velcro on the back or tape on the back, and you can just tape it in the order for the day. So that means tomorrow might be different, and it might be a different order based upon what you have to do. But it just gives your kids some ideas to choose from, so you don't have to beg them to do something. But it also allows them to be clued in on what's coming next. So then they have a little bit of certainty in the world that's completely uncertain.
Yeah. That's really good. You know, it's funny. We, and one of the things we do with our marriage retreat, we have a chart that talks about flexibility and rigidity. rigidness, in the sense in which we're like, there are people who are like, this is the schedule. We're sticking to it to the minute, to the T. And then there are those of us like myself and my wife, we're a little bit more on the flexible side where we're not as schedule oriented. We just kind of like to go and do and see what happens. And so we've had to become a little bit more on the rigid side of the schedule and different things like that. And so we've got the dry erase board sitting on our kitchen counter with the schedule. And the first day, Nikki and the kids, they did it. And then one day they got off schedule a little bit. And my daughter she was like, what are we doing? Like, it's 9:00. We're supposed to be doing this right now, And so it's funny to see kids' personalities even coming out. And just, you learn a lot about your children through this experience as well. And so, but I love the idea of the room time and then the chart time and just having the different blocks, because taking the bite-sized chunks makes it a little more manageable as well.
That's right. And if you prefer the flexible lifestyle, you could actually have the boxes on a dry erase board, or you could stick them up there on little squares with tape. And instead of saying, you've got to do it this time, you could say, these are all the things we're going to do today. Which one would you like to do first?
That's great. Yeah.
And then you still have a little bit of flexibility, because kids like choice. You still have some flexibility where you have some direction, they have some choice. And then you're not like worried about hitting certain timelines.
Yeah.
What I think is really, what's really great is when you have two flexible parents and a rigid child. You know what I mean? That really makes an adventure. But that's where God put us in homes together for a reason, and we are made more holy because of that.
There you go. It's a process of sanctification for sure.
That's right.
What about with teenagers? What are some good ideas? I mean, you've got teenagers. What are some things? I mean, because as a parent of a child, it's a little bit more of that. We talk about commander, coach, consultant, different terms, but there's a sense in which you as the parent, when you've got younger children, it's like, this is what we're doing and here it is. With older teenagers especially, but with teenagers, you want to give them some flexibility and some freedom. You want them to be able to make good choices. And so what does that look like as far as, hey, we're stuck at home together though? How do we give them good choices, give them freedoms in that? But what are some creative ideas of engaging them? The question is specifically engaging with our teenager while we're in confinement, right?
Yeah, and that's actually really difficult, because naturally in the transition season of a teenager's life, that's when they're becoming more and more independent. And depending upon how old your teenager is, like, this absolutely short circuits that whole process.
Mm-hmm.
That, hey, I'm supposed to be at the movies with my friends, or I'm supposed to be this or that or this or that. So a lot of times when we encounter a lot of resistance from our teenagers, we have to work to not take it personal, because it really feels personal. Because they know us as parents, they know our buttons, and they push them all over the place. But see, really, the issue is not the issue. Like, the issue may not really be about me. The issue really might be about the social media post or the direct message that they just got from a friend. And I just got caught in the crossfire because they're sad or upset or hurt. They're not really gifted in expressing it. So then they just make my life miserable as a parent. And then I think it's about me, because they say to me, well, you always act like this. When really it's not about me at all. It's actually about the message that they just got.
Yeah.
But I don't know that. And, but then there's also the flip side, like I jump off of a work call that's not going well. And then I walk out because I'm trying to find a snack from the snack shelf. And I bump into my teenager, and then I chew them up. And my teenagers are like, what's wrong with you? And you always do this, when really it had nothing to do with them. It just because I got off this work call. So what's happening is we got difficulty that's just flying by in every direction, and we're just missing it. And it's just creating conflict that between two people that originally wasn't actually between two people. So being able to take a time out and to say, actually, I encourage this even before Corona, when things escalate, take a time out and circle back around in the conversation. But what we find is we're all so busy, we take a time out and we never really circle back around.
Mm,
Well, now you get to circle back around because there's
yeah.
nowhere else you can go. And
How,
just
how, how
taking,
would you say communication between a parent and a teenager has changed through this? Because I think there's a sense in which it could help because I mean, you're here, right? But then at the same time, there's some challenges with that.
yeah, and that's where I want to encourage parents of teenagers, like we're all in this boat together. See, how it's changed is everyone was so busy, you just got out of it.
Mhm.
You just moved on. Next thing moved on, but there's no getting out of it. So now what's happened, and I would say this across the board, because the BabbCenter is a large practice. There's 30 people on the team, and pretty consistent across the board. What everyone is saying on the team is that we're actually still seeing the same issues. They're just magnified 5 times.
Mm,
See, you would think that in our counseling work, we'd be seeing all these brand new issues, but we're not. It's that teenager problems are just magnified because there's no way to hide from them.
wow.
That if I'm struggling to communicate effectively with my teen, well, that's only magnified because that's all we've got right now.
Yeah.
And so I want to encourage you, like, even in the difficulty, it's the opportunity to turn back towards the issues that were already there. And it's just giving you time to work on it when typically your teenagers would just naturally just go off to college and go away. And then you would have some unresolved stuff forever. So, and as the parent, you know, really what we find, there's a couple of behaviors that we see, especially with teenagers. Um, One of them I call tune in, that when your teenager shares something and you come back at them as a parent, and maybe you had a really big argument about it in the past, they're actually tuning into that in the past, not tuning into the present. So
Mm,
when you encounter a lot of grief from them, just recognize that that's coming from a history, and that's just manifested itself in the present. So that's where you have to say, okay, hold on, time out. You say that I always look at you that way when we talk about this. Help me understand that as your dad,
yeah.
because I want you to know that I hear you, and I'm afraid that what I've done in the past doesn't help that right now. So let's take a few moments, and I want you to teach me as your dad how you know when I hear you and you know when I don't.
Mm.
And just make yourself available to listen to some of those pieces. And that helps address the tune in behaviors. They're tuning in from the things from the past that are brought up in the present. The other one I call is tune out behaviors. That's where like they just completely shut you off.
Mm.
It's kind of like Charlie Brown's Teacher. If you've ever watched that really, really old cartoon, that the Charlie Brown and the characters are talking, and when Charlie Brown's teachers talk, it's they the teacher's talking, you have no idea what they're saying.
Yeah.
So when your kids are tuning out, one of the ways from a teen as a parent, you can ask your teen, you'd be like, look, you didn't hear me, you're tuning me out. I understand that. So help me understand, teach me ways that I can share information with you that you probably don't want to talk about, because we're
Mm.
going to have to do it. But why don't you teach me in the ways that I know that you can hear me and I know that you listen?
I think
So,
that's really good. The follow with that, there was a question that someone submitted. How do you have a productive conversation with someone when they only hear criticism?
mm,
And I think that ties into what you're talking about, because just because we're speaking doesn't mean it's being heard,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
being interpreted a certain way. So how do we ensure that it's not coming across as critical or some other way that somebody might be hearing it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. A lot of times we feel like people are being critical to us when they share information to us and we don't have the opportunity to reflect that back or to share
Mm.
back. Because what's happened is you've been hammered and hammered and hammered and hammered about what's wrong. And then, I mean, I'm guilty of this as a dad. I'm like, why did you do that? And they're like, "Dit, dit, dit, dit." And I'm like, no, excuse me. We don't do that in our home. That is not the way that we reflect God, his glory, and our family name. So, and then I launch into this lecture, right? So my kids feel the critical nature of it
Yeah.
because actually it's pretty critical. So it's kind of honest. So
Yeah.
what I've learned and what I try to do is I try to shift that back, where when I express something, I give them the opportunity to communicate back. And what they need is they need to be heard. They need to be heard or feel heard. So I do, and I joke about this, but it's true. I use reflective listening. So when my children or teenagers say something to me, like, I feel like you're being mean to me while we're at home, instead of dad going into defensive posture or mom going into defensive posture, we flip it and we say, okay, I hear you.
Yeah.
And what you're saying to me is, you feel like I'm being mean to you because now we're all stuck in the same home. And when you can reflect back exactly what they said to you,
Yeah.
two things happen. Your teenager feels heard, and they may not have felt heard before. And if you get it wrong, they'll correct you, because your teen will say, no, 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 that's not what I meant at all.
Right.
So then instead of saying, but that's what you said, instead of saying that, they're like, no, 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 that's not what I meant at all. And say, okay, I'm sorry. Why don't you tell me again? Because I want to make sure that I hear what you're saying and what you're feeling. And
Mm.
then they go, well, I'm really, really missing my friends because now I'm stuck at home with you. Well, then say, okay, so instead of taking the bait, I'm stuck at home with you, go back to the original part with missing my friends. And then you reflect back and say, so what you're saying is blah, 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 blah. And I know that's a lot of words, but as a parent, if our teenagers feel like we hear them and we can restate it in a way that captures the essence of what they're trying to communicate, then it shifts the tone of the conversation from mom and dad telling me what I'm doing wrong or what I need to do right to mom and dad actually heard me. And that begins to shift the tone. You might have a teenager that is like really reluctant to this, right? And maybe because of the past, that most of your conversations tend to be when they're in trouble or when they need to do something. So change that. But I recommend doing what I'd call flybys, like not trying to engage them in a conversation that's going to result in conflict. But when you see them doing something right, just do a flyby and be like, huh, that was very helpful. Thank you. And then keep walking, because your teen is going to think, okay, wait a second. Was that a compliment? Were they being nice to me? What do they want? And you're not still there to have the argument. You just keep going. And now you're in another room. So I would encourage you that if you guys are not at that communication place to go back and forth, just ease into the shallow end by doing lots of flybys. Just like walking by and saying, hey, I appreciate that. Or maybe your teen has been sleeping till 11 and
Mm.
then they get up at 9. Fly by and be like, hey, you're up at 9. It's great to see you. And then keep going. Don't say, huh, I bet that burned when your feet hit the floor at 9 a.m. Right? Don't do that. Just acknowledge the right, keep going, and they're going to get it that you're seeing more of what they're doing right than what you're doing wrong. And that might change the tone of criticism.
Yeah, that's great stuff. You know, we're running out of time for our time today, and we'll do a part two if that's okay with you. And I think
Yeah.
there's several questions that have arisen that I want to address with part two, and a lot of those deal with anxiety in
Mm,
particular. And I know there's a lot that's going on with children with that, with adults as well. And so we'll handle those and talk through those next time. I want to finish up this morning with our time with Matthew chapter 10. There's a verse here that says, "Aren't two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them falls to the ground without your Father's consent. But even the hairs of your head have all been counted. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." There's a sense in which we aren't in control of what's happening, but we know the God who is in control. And even when it seems like, it adds a lot of questions of why is he allowing these things to happen? But what we can do is we can trust that he cares deeply for us along the way. How does that word, as far as uh, the encouragement from Scripture, how would you say that ties in with kind of what we've been talking about? Knowing that God knows everything about us, He knows how many hairs are on our head. He cares deeply about us. What How does that tie into kind of some of these questions that we've addressed?
yeah. For me personally, like, I'm doing the best that I can do.
Yeah.
There's a lot that I can do better, but as a person of faith, like, I've got confidence and hope knowing that there's a creator that is bigger and better than anything I could ever imagine.
Yeah.
So what I do every morning is I get up and I do the best that I can do. And I have the comfort knowing that there is something larger than me
Mm.
and that God can take my feeble attempts and he can care for me and for our children in a way that far exceeds anything that I could ever do. So in the midst of my failures, in the midst of my fears, I do find comfort knowing that I'm cared for. And
Mm.
that is where my faith is greater than any tip or strategy or anything that I could communicate because he's there and he cares.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Jason, thanks for your time today. And I look forward to next time when we can talk through some more of these questions.